Good morning and welcome to the Shell Scotford manufacturing complex near Edmonton, Alberta. I'm Michael Crothers, the President and Country Chair of Shell Canada. I'm joined by Premier Jason Kenney and by my colleague Mark Pattenden, who's the VP Manufacturing for Canada and also the GM of this site. Thanks very much for joining us in this virtual press conference. I'd like to first start by acknowledging that we're here on Treaty 6 territory, home of the First Nations, Métis and Inuit peoples, and all others that call this land their home. I'm delighted that Premier Kenney has joined us here today as we share an important achievement for Shell, our province, our country, in our journey to provide much needed energy with a lower environmental footprint. The Quest carbon capture and sequestration facility has officially and safely stored 5 million tons of CO2. And it has done so ahead of schedule in less than 5 years since its startup. Congratulations to Mark Pattenden and the Scotford team here at Scotford. All of Shell Canada is incredibly proud of this achievement. 5 million tons of CO2 is equivalent to about 1.25 million vehicle emissions. It's a huge amount of CO2 that's been captured here. And Quest has achieved this at a lower cost than expected. If Quest was to be built again, it could be built and operated at 30 to 35% less cost thanks to the improvements made by the Shell Scotford team. Quest was designed to capture about 1/3 of the CO2 emissions from the Scotford upgrader where we are today. The upgrader turns bitumen into synthetic crude, which in turn is converted into fuels such as diesel and gasoline, and also into feedstocks for our petrochemicals facilities here at site. These are all vital products that Canadians use every day. The CO2 is then injected 2 kilometers deep underground and stored underneath impermeable layers of rock. Thanks to the CCS technology developed here in Alberta and also in Quebec, interestingly, we can significantly reduce carbon emissions from our energy sector. With Quest, we've shown the world that Canadians have the wherewithal, the ingenuity, the technology to lower carbon emissions, and also that CCS technology is viable and it works. Widespread adoption of CCS is one of the key solutions the world needs right now to help solve the climate challenge. And along with making investments in renewable energy and lower carbon products is part of how Shell plans to become a net zero emissions company by 2050. We're grateful for the leadership of our governments, both federal and provincial, in supporting the development of Quest. Quest was made possible in part through funding from both levels of government. And we continue to share knowledge from this facility with many countries to ensure widespread implementation of carbon capture. Shell recently took an investment decision on the Northern Lights CCS project in Norway together with our partners Total and Equinor. Northern Lights has incorporated lessons learned from this site from Quest, thanks to publicly available information on its design and operation on the Government of Alberta website. Along with strong environmental performance, Quest and our Scotford manufacturing complex is committed to providing economic opportunity for Strathcona County, for Alberta, and for Canada. This week, the Scotford team began a major turnaround, a maintenance activity on site that will provide more than 3,800 jobs, most of them local. This is a much-needed shot in the arm for Alberta families in these difficult times. The maintenance will be carried out with extensive controls to protect workers and ensure their care and safety. In COVID times, Shell has had an even greater focus on environmental, social, and economic aspects of all that we do. This includes our sites for the future and how Shell, our industry, and our country can lead the global energy transition that we're now in. Canada, I think, is uniquely positioned to capitalize on the development of lower carbon solutions through our highly experienced energy workforce and our supportive government policies. As I mentioned, Shell has set an ambitious goal to become, by 2050 or sooner, a net zero carbon energy company. and we've set targets linked to executive pay to drive those ambitions. Our Global New Energies business, in which we're investing $1 to $2 billion US in 2020, is part of that transformation. In Canada, we're actively exploring a number of areas in new energies, including biofuels, energy storage, hydrogen, EV charging, and the deployment of digital technology to support our customers. I'm really proud that Shell Canada is at the forefront of continuous innovation, and we believe in a strong future for Alberta based on our natural resources and the incredible people here in Alberta to provide new and cleaner ways to use those resources. Our Scotford site, where we're here today, is synonymous with innovation and entrepreneurship. With its leading technologies, environmental performance, and integrated value chains, connecting the molecules and the electrons, if you will, to add value here in the province. I've seen the evolution of Scotford firsthand through my career. I graduated from UA in 1984, just as Scotford was beginning its initial startups of the refinery and soldering plant. And since then, it's continued to grow and evolve. We see Scotford as relevant today and into the future as an energy hub for the next generation. Its integrated approach not only makes it the most energy efficient of its kind in North America, but also in the world. And it's a platform for future growth and expansion, for us to provide Canadian and global customers with lower carbon solutions. So while we're here today to salute Quest and the incredible achievement of capture and storage of 5 million tons of CO2, we envision many more milestones and contributions from Shell Canada and Scotford as we build a cleaner energy future. Thank you. I'd like to invite Premier Kenney to the podium. Premier, just 1 second.
Whoops. All right. Thank you very much, Michael, and great to be here at Scotford in Fort Saskatchewan to celebrate an important achievement and also the creation of jobs and economic growth here in Alberta. So, first of all, before I begin, I want to talk about the StatsCan jobs report today. I'm happy to see that they report the creation of 91,000 new jobs last month in June. That's important progress, but we have a long way to go. The unemployment rate continues to be at an historic high due to the global coronavirus recession and, of course, the largest collapse in energy prices in history. And that's why last week Alberta's government launched our economic recovery plan, a plan to build, to diversify, and to create jobs through bold action that will leverage our biggest industry, energy, while continuing to diversify in other areas, including innovation. And this project right here, this Quest carbon capture and storage project, is right at the heart of those two initiatives, those that drive to create jobs through a future for our oil and gas sector, while also doing so in a way that promotes innovation and demonstrates our environmental responsibility. So thanks very much to Michael, to Mark, and to their team here at Shell Scotford Complex to celebrate this landmark achievement for your company and our province in the global quest to reduce carbon emissions. 5 million tons, 5 megatons, effectively 1 million tons of carbon captured in each of the last 5 years. Congratulations to everyone who made this happen. That includes, of course, visionary leaders at Shell like Michael and Mark, and everyone who helped build and now operates this world-beating Quest carbon capture and storage facility. Albertans and Canadians deserve congratulations too. This project was born back in 2009 as part of a pioneering investment in carbon capture and storage, or CCS, technology by Alberta's government under then Premier Stelmach and by the Government of Canada under then Prime Minister Harper. I'm proud to say I was part of the Harper government at the time, and it's an honor as Premier Stelmach's successor to see the environmental policy choices made at that time paying off in such a big way for Alberta and the world today. That payoff is obviously huge in terms of reducing annual emissions from the Scotford refinery and upgrader by 1/3. As Mark said, it's equivalent to taking 1.25 million carbon-emitting vehicles off our roads. I understand that Quest was not only the world's first commercial CCS operation, but it's also the biggest and the best, having sequestered more CO2 in total than any of the other 20 large-scale commercial facilities operating around the world, and more in a single calendar year than any other. This is real global leadership in the fight against climate change. Our trailblazing technologies and business models for CCS are being copied around the world. Today, there are 59 CCS facilities in various stages of development worldwide, with a capture capacity of more than 127 million tons a year. And all of that started right here in Alberta. I know there have been doubters at home and abroad, but CCS is now established as a primary technology for reducing industrial emissions, and it's only going to get bigger, better, and more cost-effective. And in fact, carbon capture and storage has now really turned into carbon capture utilization and storage, as new technologies are finding ways to help us extract abandoned energy in reservoirs to improve productivity in the oil and gas sector while reducing emissions. No one should be surprised that this massively important technological advancement was born here in Alberta. Innovation is what we do in Alberta. As Premier Manning once said, Albertans are people who dream of changing the world from their tractor seat. Innovation enabled us to extract hydrocarbons from the sand and muskeg of northern Alberta that holds the world's third largest deposit of oil. Innovation built the world's first synthetic refinery right here at Scotford. And innovation built the world's largest carbon capture project, the 240-kilometer Alberta Carbon Trunk Line that just began compressing, and storing up to 14.6 megatons of carbon per year for injection and permanent storage in depleted underground oil formations. CCUS is game-changing technology that can be used to reduce emissions produced by a wide range of industrial applications apart from just oil refining. Last November, we announced, for example, funding through Emissions Reduction Alberta as part of our Technology Innovations Emissions Reduction Plan to explore capturing and storing emissions from the Lehigh Cement Edmonton plant. This would be another first for Alberta, the first cement producer in North America to use carbon capture and storage to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Now, Albertans are not by nature boastful people, but we do have to celebrate and crow just a little bit about achievements like these, because we really don't get the credit that we deserve for all the investment and effort that we put into responsible, sustainable energy and resource development. The fact is this: Alberta's energy is produced under the world's highest environmental, human rights, and labor standards, bar none. Way back in 2007, we became the first place in North America to put a price on carbon for all large emitters across all sectors. This was an incentive for energy producers like Shell to become global leaders in the race to become the most carbon competitive producers on Earth. Alberta's energy companies spent $24.5 billion on environmental protection between 2006 and 2016. That's 42%, get this, 42% of all environmental spending in Canada, more than any other industry, more than any other province. Our oil sands producers reduced carbon emissions per barrel by 30% over the last 2 decades, and the majors are aiming for net zero emissions over the next couple of decades. They are dramatically reducing water consumption and further lowering emissions through the application of technologies like cogeneration. And Alberta's government's continuing to incent more investment and innovations in emissions reduction through our Technology Innovation Emissions Reduction Program. But becoming the energy producer of choice for the world isn't just about reducing carbon emissions. It's also about striving to be better than our competitors across the whole range of metrics, environmental, social, and governments that direct so much of today's investments. And that's something else we've got to crow about. Canada, led by Alberta, ranks first amongst the world's top 10 exporting nations in our combined ESG scores. Top 10 oil exporting nations, I should say, in our ESG scores. That's not too hard, frankly, against competitors like Russia and Saudi Arabia, who not only have abysmal environmental and human rights records, but who manipulate supply to steal market share, as we saw this April. But I believe we're going to stay in the top spot, even among the world's handful of ethical, democratic producing countries, as global investors hear great environmental news like our carbon capture achievements here. And I think our lead on the social metric will only grow as word gets out that more and more First Nations are supporting pipelines and energy projects and partnering in resource development, including through our new Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. And let me underscore that Indigenous support was validated by the Supreme Court of Canada a week ago when they confirmed that 120 of the 128 interested First Nations support or do not oppose the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion project. I just want to say, very important, projects like this are a key part of Alberta's recovery plan to build, to diversify, and create jobs. When the global economy comes back from COVID, when demand returns for oil and gas, we are going to see, I believe, something of a supply shortage because of all the upstream exploration that has been canceled. And so we'll see prices go up, and that will be a great opportunity for Alberta, especially as we make progress on pipelines. But there is one critical factor. We've got to bring investment back. And that means we've got to demonstrate our progress on environmental responsibility, which is why investments in projects like this, in CCUS, in the carbon trunk line, in so many other technologies that are coming on board that we will support, that's why they are so important to jobs, the economy, and to the future prosperity of Alberta. And so let me just wrap up by saying that, on Wednesday we saw a fiscal snapshot from the federal government, a $340 billion deficit, pushing the national debt to $1 trillion. In other words, the global pandemic and recession has put this country in a deep fiscal hole. And the only way we will be able to cope with that is to get our economy firing on all cylinders. And we cannot do that unless we get the largest sector of the Canadian economy moving. That's oil and gas. So continued obstruction of pipelines and energy projects is simply not an option for any government that is serious about economic recovery, getting folks back to work, generating tax revenues to pay for public services, and to deal with the fiscal crisis. So, thanks again to Shell and to all of your partners here at Scotford and at the Quest Complex for everything you're doing to make Alberta energy the most competitive on Earth. Together, our voices will tell the world that there is no better place to produce energy than right here in Alberta. Thanks very much.
Are there any questions?
Okay, we'll start the Q&A. Operator, can you please put through the first caller?
First question comes from James Keller of the Globe and Mail. Your line is open. This is a bit of a two-parter for the Premier. Can you explain the rationale for this idea of publishing the pay of Alberta doctors? And what would you say to Albertans who wonder why the government is going to war with physicians in the middle of a pandemic?
Sure. Thanks very much. So first of all, we need to recognize that Alberta has the best compensated physicians in Canada by a country mile. According to data from the Canadian Institute of Health Information, CIHI, our physicians are compensated on average more than 20% more than the average across the country. The average Alberta physician, their gross billings are $413,000. That's $107,000 more than the average across Canada in other provinces like Ontario. We are going through a fiscal and economic crisis, and everybody needs to be part of the solution. In the past 5 years, the average private sector's after-tax income has declined by 10%. Most people in the government sector have been frozen over the past 5 years, but physicians, who are the best compensated people in the public sector, have seen a 23% increase in their compensation over 4 years, about a 6% annual increase. That simply is not sustainable, as our economy has been dealt the body blow of the coronavirus recession, the biggest collapse in energy prices in history, and all of that on top of 5 years of economic stagnation. And yet during that time, physician compensation, total compensation in Alberta went from $4.2 billion to $5.2 billion. We've been simply trying to work with the Medical Association to negotiate an agreement where there would not be further increases that are simply unaffordable. And let me say, Alberta also has the highest per capita number of physicians in Canada. And so I gather that the AMA is now using a tactic trying to scare people to suggest physicians are going to start leaving Alberta en masse. According to the College of Physicians and Surgeons, there is no evidence of a increase in the number of physicians leaving service here in Alberta. And I really have to ask, why would a physician choose to leave Alberta to go to a province where they would be paid substantially less, where they would pay substantially higher income taxes, and in the case of BC and Ontario, would also encounter a higher cost of living? So we support, obviously, our physicians are a critical part of our healthcare system. We think they should be compensated not just fairly, but generously. But there are limits, and those limits are more clear now than they have ever been. Our economy today is at least 10% smaller than it was 3 months ago. Back in 2014, we had a $365 billion Alberta economy. We now have about a $300 billion Alberta economy. Our revenues have collapsed in the last 4 months. Alberta is looking at a provincial deficit this year of at least $20 billion. And so it is, we're asking physicians to join everyone else in facing the economic and fiscal reality that we're living through together. And that's one of the reasons why we are now considering greater measures for transparency. In many provinces, physician compensation is subject to sunshine lists that allow for that transparency, just as it is for other high-paid people in the public sector. So I can't understand why there would be a double standard for the most highly paid people in the public sector. So I'm always in favor of transparency, and that's one transparency measure that we think is worth considering.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next question comes from Graham Thompson.
And by the way, my apologies to Shell. We're going to get some off-topic questions, but that goes with the territory here.
Yeah, actually, my question was on topic, for one. Just one thing, first of all, before I ask the question, just to clarify a point, Premier, you were saying that Quest had sequestered 5 megatons in each year the last 5 years. That'd be 25 megatons. I believe it's 5 megatons over the 5 years, I believe. just to correct that, if I'm wrong, let me know. But my question is, the Quest project went ahead because, as you mentioned, the Selmac government put a lot of money in. It was like $900 million into the Quest project, both federally and provincially. Very expensive to do these projects. But you're saying if CCS is part of the economic recovery plan, do you plan on subsidizing any new CCS project in the future?
Well, we did announce in November, Graham, through Emissions Reduction Alberta and the Technology Innovations and Reduction Program, that we are supporting work at the Lehigh Cement Factory in Edmonton for a CCS pilot project. And we are considering a number of other possibilities through the TIER program. We've been explicit about that. I remember in the last election, you were skeptical or critical of that platform commitment. And I understand why, Graham. I'll confess, I was a skeptic about CCS a decade ago because of the costs. It was unproven technology, but that's always the case in breakthroughs through innovation. And you have to make, I think, take calculated risks to advance innovation. You can't do it in everywhere with unlimited amounts of money, but Alberta put a wager on the future of CCS technology, and I believe the progress here has validated that. And I would also say that we have seen the cost efficiency of CCS projects the costs come down significantly and the efficiency go up. So CCS is becoming an increasingly, I think, attractive path to achieve significant emissions reductions. If we didn't start with this project a decade ago, we never would have made some of that progress. And more progress will continue to be made. As I pointed out, there are CCUS projects happening all across the world. Much of that technology was first adopted here in Alberta. So we're open. I don't have an inventory today of additional projects that we'll support. We're open to some possibilities. A number of submissions are being made, including by Shell, and we'll look at those as part of our broader technology innovation and emissions reduction program. And I don't know if the guys from Shell would like to comment on the quantum or the technology.
Yeah, I just confirm that it's 5 million tons in total that's been sequestered since Quest began operation 5 years ago. And point out that it's done so with only 1% downtime, so it shows how capable our engineers have been in developing the technology and how excellent our operations folks and maintenance teams have been enabled to keep it running. Next question.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
The next question comes from Shannon Scott of CBC. Your line is open.
Hi, Mr. Premier. I would like to go back to the job numbers for a second, please. I'm wondering what your government is doing to try to help get more women back into the workforce. Today's numbers showed that nearly 1 in 7 are still getting less than half of the paid work that they were pre-pandemic. I know that you've made a lot of announcements about creating jobs, but they're typically male-dominated industries. How are we going to try to get the province's women back to work?
Well, by getting the whole economy back to work. There's not two separate gender-based economies. There's the entire economy. Many of the women who have been made unemployed during the coronavirus recession were typically working in the service and hospitality sector, for example, the tourism sector, that had been hit especially hard. And the fact that Alberta reopened that sector more quickly and broadly than most places around Canada has been helpful, but obviously far too many women and Albertans generally are unemployed. And that's why last week we launched our economic recovery plan, a plan to build, to diversify, and to grow our economy, to get out of this deep recession. I will say, obviously, a key factor here is childcare, which is why we have provided some significant financial support to childcare operators to try to get them back up and running, working closely with them on how they can do so safely within the public health guidelines. And it's also why we are determined to see the schools reopen, the K-12 education system get back in operation come this September. because many women, being primary childcare, primarily responsible for childcare, were taken out of the workforce with this closure of the schools. And so I think it's going to be critical to help unemployed Alberta women to see that the schools are operating again. Minister of Education Adriana LaGrange will be making an announcement about further measures being taken to ensure the schools will start up in September. But I would come back to the larger point, which is we've got to get the whole economy moving again. And that's why our province has stepped up with the largest, the biggest economic recovery plan of any province in Canada. The reality is that I'm also concerned about the folks who have been facing unemployment or underemployment for as much as 5 years. Before the coronavirus recession, we had seen a real crisis for unemployment amongst younger men in particular, where I think the labor force participation rate amongst 18 to 25-year-old men had fallen from 78% to something like 59%, which was catastrophic, and many of those folks being out of work on and off for 5 years. So there are different groups within our population that have been more affected than others. Bottom line is we've got to get the economy growing for everyone.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
The next question comes from Emma Graney of Globe and Mail. Your line is open.
Sorry, go ahead, Emma.
Yeah, no worries. Feel free to add in your other thought after I ask this question. I just want to go back to something you said there about CCS, and you were kind of a self-admitted skeptic like a decade ago or quite some time ago, and you've changed your mind. But you also said that, CCS projects are only good now and really operating now and are at such a stage they are because of the investments that we made decades ago. So I'm curious as to why there doesn't seem to be any appetite to extend that logic through to making investments in, say, renewables or larger investments in tech industries or larger investments in artificial intelligence, which also have been shown to potentially create more jobs and potentially have some more economic growth for Alberta.
Sure. I just wanted to add, in response to the other question, I forget who posed the question, I think from CBC, was about, there was a statement that many of the job creation projects I've talked about are from industries typically dominated by men. I just want to say this, we're also trying to change that. We are supporting Building Women's Futures, a great organization to encourage women going into the industrial trades, for example. And our Host Skills for Jobs agenda is partly an effort to encourage young people, both young women and men, to go into the great, good-paying jobs and careers in the trades, like the kind of the 3,800 people who will be working on the turnaround here at Scotford this summer. On your question, Emma, I would say this, that Alberta has made enormous investments to support things like, for example, artificial intelligence. Through our university system, we are continuing to do so through our innovation sector strategy. And as announced last week, we will be launching the innovation tax credit so that we have at least a level playing field with other provinces and incentivizing start-up phase tech companies in the innovation sector. So this is our economic recovery plan is a plan to diversify. I will say that one thing that's unique about the government's support for carbon capture and storage technology is that it had a dedicated source of revenue, namely the levy on major industrial CO2 emitters, which is now the tier levy. And that's not the case for other sectors. We're not going to start raising taxes in order to pay for things like innovation tax credits. So this is, I think, a unique example of where you can have a levy that incentivizes environmental progress to reduce carbon intensity, in part through technology like this. That's exactly the premise of our tier program. And we think it's going to be an important part of Alberta's economic future.
Okay, we have time for two more. Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Our next question comes from Lisa Johnson of Post Media. Your line is open.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I'm wondering, AIMCO released its report yesterday on its volatile trading strategies that recently took a hit, and I'm wondering if I can get your general reaction and opinion on the report. especially considering the province is moving a lot of public pensions into AIMCO, and given the public interest in that file.
Sure. So, as you know, AIMCO is operated independent of government under the direction of a highly qualified board. We recently appointed as chair of the board Mark Wiseman, the former chairman of the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board. And I understand that the board and management are reviewing some of the decisions that were made that led to that particular strategy. My understanding is that, well, as of a month ago, AIMCO's overall portfolio was down by less than the average amongst major pension and asset managers around the world. Every single major asset manager has obviously seen a decline in their assets during the largest global economic contraction since the 1930s. And so I do understand that they're looking at one particular investment strategy and how that was made and whether there was appropriate governance rules followed in that respect. And I know that Minister Tays has spoken to both the President and the Chairman of AIMCO to ensure that they do a proper lessons learned on that particular investment. I will point out, however, that AIMCO's long-term investment track record is very solid. They have typically beat the market in most years, and I think that's what we would hope for from the Crown Corporation that invests assets on behalf of Albertans.
Okay, operator, can you please put through the last caller?
Our final question comes from Charlotte of Radio Canada. Your line is open.
Bonjour, M. Kenney. Une question sur les chiffres du chômage qui montrent à quel point que les femmes sont plus touchées que les hommes par la crise du coronavirus. C'est quoi dans votre plan de relance qui est mis en place pour répondre justement à ce problème?
Tout d'abord, je suis heureux à voir dans les chiffres aujourd'hui une augmentation de 91 000 nouvelles emplois, mais cela étant dit, évidemment, le chômage est toujours une crise à cause de la récession du coronavirus. Et c'est la raison pour laquelle, la semaine dernière, nous avons lancé le plan d'action économique de l'Alberta pour diversifier l'économie et pour créer les emplois. Et c'est pour tous les Albertains, les femmes et les hommes. C'est essentiel d'avoir la croissance économique pour tous les secteurs, pour toute l'économie. On ne peut pas mettre l'accent exclusivement sur certains secteurs, sur certaines Albertaines ou Albertains. Je souligne par exemple que depuis les dernières 5 années, on a vu une diminution d'emplois pour les jeunes hommes en particulier très grave. Et il y a des jeunes hommes en Alberta qui sont chômeurs depuis 4-5 ans. Alors, évidemment, il y a une augmentation de chômage parmi les femmes dernièrement, et en particulier dans le service d'hospitalité de service. C'est une des raisons pour lesquelles nous avons ouvert les restaurants, le secteur d'hospitalité plus vite que les autres provinces. Deuxièmement, c'est la raison pour laquelle nous avons donné les subventions aux garderies pour aider avec la garde d'enfants. Et troisièmement, c'est les raisons pour lesquelles nous sommes déterminés d'ouvrir les écoles en septembre prochain pour que les familles, y compris les mères en Alberta, auront cet appui pour leurs enfants. C'est essentiel et le ministre de l'Éducation fera une annonce prochainement en ce qui concerne l'ouverture des écoles cette année.
Thanks very much. That concludes the question and answer.
Thank you. All right.